This is The Raid, exposing the dark world of America's deportation machine. I'm your host, John Carlos Frey. On the podcast today is Sara Van Hofwegen. She's the Managing Director of Legal Access Programs at the Acacia Center for Justice. Through a series of initiatives, the Acacia Center for Justice raises funds, trains attorneys, and creates programs to strengthen and expand immigrant legal defense programs for adults and children across the country.
So welcome to the podcast. And it's a pleasure to have you here. I'm really looking forward to the conversation, even though it is a very difficult time for all of us with this subject matter.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Great. I wanted to ask you specifically, if we could, just cover this issue of migrant children in detention or deportation. I'm hearing crazy things like minors are having to advocate for themselves. There are more children in detention than there have ever been in the history of detention. We're having family separation again, and kids are being left behind. So, I mean, there's this massive kind of subject matter that I know that Acacia Justice really focuses on, and specifically children. So I'm just going to let you go. And if there are questions, if you don't mind, I'll raise my hand or jump in and get really specific. So with the subject matters that I just brought up, I'd love to hear your take.
I'm happy to share with you what I can and to answer whatever questions that I can. And just by way of background, I'm a managing director at the Acacia Center for Justice. We're a national nonprofit. We work and support partners across the country. We work with a network of human rights defenders who provide legal defense to immigrants at risk of detention or deportation. We do a lot of work specifically with unaccompanied children. And with our work with unaccompanied children, we have a network of more than 90 legal service providers across the country who are on the ground representing kids and advocating for them directly every single day. And I think I can start maybe by explaining to your audience what an unaccompanied child is. I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with that. So the word unaccompanied child, it's actually unaccompanied alien child is the term that is in our laws. We don't like to use the word alien because it's dehumanizing. But it is a term that was defined more than 20 years ago for children who are in the United States without legal status and without a parent or guardian to take care of them. And the framework for unaccompanied children really expanded in 2008 when Congress passed a law called the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act, which specifically found that kids without parents or legal guardians are vulnerable to trafficking. And that as a country, we want to protect children from human trafficking and other abuses and exploitations. And it created this whole framework of protections that kids are supposed to have that have been in place ever since and that we're finding are under attack right now in a lot of different ways. So that includes when a child comes to the border and is apprehended at the border without their parent or a legal guardian with them. They're not supposed to go into ICE custody or Border Patrol custody for more than 72 hours. They're transferred to the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement, where they're supposed to be given shelter care, education, and then reunited with a family member or another caregiver in the United States who can take care of them while they go through an immigration process to see if they can stay in the U.S.
So my understanding is that if a minor, what would the age be, under 17?
Under 18.
Under 18, presents themselves at the border without an accompanying guardian or adult or parent, something like that, the government takes them, and there is the Office of Refugee Resettlement is specially geared towards taking care of children, right? And they become a ward of the federal government. We take care of them if we can't find their family members or we can't find next of kin. So there is a service specifically for children. They're not just necessarily put in a detention facility with adults.
Correct. They're not allowed to be put in detention centers with adults. There is family detention in limited settings for kids and their parents.
How long would they be in custody?
So it really varies. One of the things we've seen this year is that times that kids are in custody has dramatically increased. I think in past years, the average was like 30, 35 days that a child would be in custody, maybe even lower than that. This year, for fiscal year 2025, the average length of stay for a child was 117 days. And we actually have seen in recent months that the government has pretty much stopped releasing kids from custody altogether.
How young could they be in ORR, in Office of Refugee Resettlement?
Yes. So the youngest child I ever represented as an attorney working with unaccompanied kids was 18 months old.
Does an 18-month-old get abandoned or something?
Yeah, or the situation that I had was an 18-month-old came to the U.S. with a older relative and then was separated from the older relative. So if you come with an aunt or a sister, right, that's not your parent or lawful guardian, you might be separated from them. Or we will see children coming together. So a 16-year-old with her 18-month daughter or 18-month sister would be considered an unaccompanied child.
And that's the only classification, I guess is the right term, or is it the right term, for children that are in custody is an unaccompanied minor. We don't necessarily take care of children who may be left behind if the parents or the guardians are deported, right? That's not something that the government handles.
Correct, right. And we're seeing a couple of things happen right now, because we are seeing more and more interior enforcement and raids like you've been reporting on, and we are seeing parents picked up leaving their kids behind. Some of them are U.S. citizen kids who might end up with another relative or in foster care.
Can you explain that scenario, what that looks like, maybe for example?
So an example would be a family from Russia that one of our providers that we work with at Acacia worked with. It was a father and his 3-year-old daughter came to the United States, were going through the immigration process, had check-ins with ICE that they had to go to every month or every 2 months. They presented together at their check-in, and at the check-in, ICE detained both of them and took the father into custody and put the father in an adult detention center, and then put this 3-year-old child into ORR custody. And that child became an unaccompanied minor, right? By the actions of the government who detained their father. So their father was not available to take care of them. And so the legal service provider encounters the father in detention, and the father is terrified, doesn't know where his daughter is and what's happening to his daughter. And of course, this little girl who doesn't speak English is in custody someplace, terrified and missing her family.
I guess what I'm hearing, or I'm wanting to ask, and I don't know if this is the example that's connects the dots here, but I'm hearing about children needing to advocate for themselves in an immigration hearing or some kind of a immigration court setting about their status. And I'm not sure if this 3-year-old would have to do that, but what about that case where children, either if they don't have a lawyer, they're going to have to stand before the magistrate or what's called an immigration judge to find out what's going to happen to their status?
So there is no right to government appointed counsel in immigration court, except for a few limited situations. You have the right to an attorney, but you have to find that attorney for yourself. There is protections under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act that talks about the government having to help children access attorneys as much as possible. And so there has been federal funding available for some kids to have attorneys that the federal government will pay for. It has never been enough for all kids to have attorneys. So it's always been the situation that many children have to go to court without a lawyer to represent them. Years ago, there was some litigation around whether or not kids could have a right to counsel. And the assistant chief immigration judge at that time was deposed. And in the deposition, he said, a 3-year-old doesn't need an attorney. A 3-year-old can understand immigration law and represent themselves. Yes. And
government representative?
This was an immigration judge who stated that the position was that if I take enough time, I can get a 3-year-old to explain their case to me. I have a 4-year-old who can barely count to 20 some days. He cannot tell you what country he's from. So it's just absurd.
Or how old he is, or where he was born, or his parents' names, or, that some basic information might be difficult for a 3-year-old.
And the whole legal system is based on this farce, right? That it's possible for a child to go to court by themselves and tell the judge they want asylum and apply for this complicated form of relief. There's other forms of relief for kids where you have to go into state court and involve a lot of different court players. And the reality is it's impossible to do this unless you have an attorney representing you. I would argue even for adults, but particularly for children.
Is there a number of kids that go forward without representation and have to face this whole onslaught of confusing maze to have their case adjudicated or at least heard?
The last time I looked at the statistics, it was about 50% of children didn't have attorneys in immigration court. That's a couple of years old, so I'm not sure what the current statistic is. Our network right now represents about 20,000 children in immigration court, and the numbers of kids in court are much higher than that.
Obviously, tens of thousands. I mean, if you represent 20,000, there's many more in the system. Is this new? Is this new during the new interior enforcement that we're starting to see a lot more kids than we used to?
It's not new. This is an ongoing problem that has existed for years. It's been true of prior administrations. What we are seeing differently now, though, is an assault on due process in all sorts of different ways for kids. So the procedures become complicated, and we're seeing the government moving people through the system much faster in ways that make it harder for attorneys to access them. The government did try to take away funding for representation of children back in April, but litigation occurred from some of the legal service providers on the ground, and there's an injunction in place that requires the government to continue this program.
And I'm assuming that the federal government's funding stream, or the resources that the federal government puts into the system, are not enough.
They're not enough. Yes, they leave thousands of children without representation every year. And then we're seeing recently new practices from the government to try to keep kids from even going through the system altogether. So over Labor Day, the government tried to repatriate hundreds of children back to Guatemala without even letting them go to court or to see a judge. And these were kids without removal orders. They claimed that they could repatriate them as a child welfare matter and send them back to family members without having to take them to court. And it was legal service providers on the ground who got word of this at 5 p.m. who were able to rush to the shelters where the children were being held, figure out what's happening, and then file a lawsuit in court to keep the government from sending children back.
Can we dissect that a little bit? Because there's a couple of points I would love to ask you about that I'm not necessarily confused, but I think maybe important points. So how many children are we talking about, Guatemalan children, that were going to be deported en masse?
I think it was about 700 Guatemalan children.
And they were not going to go through their proceedings to find out what their stories were and whether or not they had relatives in the United States, or to connect them with resources. Whatever goes on in immigration court, that process was not going to happen.
Correct. So the government was trying to circumvent this process, saying, we don't have to go through the immigration system here. We're not going to deport them. We're going to repatriate them. And they claimed that the children's parents in Guatemala had said that they wanted the children back. And so they were going to send the children back under child welfare principles.
That sounds like semantics to me. Repatriation as opposed to deportation is just a way of having to bypass the actual legal system.
Correct. Yeah, there's some different legal consequences that come with being deported. You can't come back as easily. It's harder to get a visa. But yes, in essence, the end result was the children leaving the United States. And when people went and found some of these kids' parents in Guatemala, most of them said, "We have no idea what you're talking about." Like,
So the government was lying.
what the government said in court does not reflect what we heard on the ground.
You don't like the word lying?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's hard to believe that the government is telling the truth here. Who knows if wires got crossed, or if this was intentional lying about things, which I suspect it was. But either way, right, they were circumventing a legal process that exists to protect children from abuse.
I want to talk to you about that process. So if I'm one of the 700 Guatemalan kids, let's say I'm 13 years old and I'm going to be repatriated, I'm going to be sent back to Guatemala and not go through my immigration hearing process. What am I missing? What benefits do I get if I get to go through the hearing, the immigration process? Why are they circumventing that?
I get to see if I'm lawfully allowed to stay in the United States. A lot of children are coming to the U.S. facing abuse or persecution or gang violence. And under our law, they have a right to apply for asylum, to say, I'll be harmed if I go back. They lose the chance to apply for asylum. There's other protections that are specifically available to kids. Probably the most common one is special immigrant juvenile status, which are for children who have been abused, abandoned, or neglected by a parent. They would lose the chance to apply for that form of relief. And really, what they're losing is a chance to prove and argue that I'm allowed to be here in the United States under the law, and losing the chance to be safe in the U.S. if they do meet the qualifications, which a lot of kids do.
It's my understanding that immigration court, if that's really the right term, falls under the executive branch, not the judiciary branch. So if the Trump administration is trying en masse to send 700 kids back to Guatemala without due process, without going through the immigration process and being able to claim asylum or whatever legal rights they may have to stay, they're the final say, right? The federal government, the executive branch, the Trump administration, if they want them to go, they can make them go. Do I have that right?
It's partially right. It's correct that the immigration court falls under the executive branch, and the person in charge of the immigration court is the attorney general.
If she wants them to go, they're going to go.
He has the power to make decisions that are precedential for immigration judges, and we've seen more than 100 immigration judges have been fired over the course of the year because they're not seen as conservative enough. They're seen as folks who aren't going along with what the administration wants. But there is still some oversight by the circuit courts and by the federal court. So if I apply for asylum in immigration court and lose my case here in California, I can appeal that to the Ninth Circuit. And the Ninth Circuit can make a decision about whether or not I'm entitled for asylum.
You're going to have to leave the immigration court system and go into a federal court system.
Correct. Yeah. And one of the things that we at Acacia think is extremely problematic is that we don't have an independent immigration court. It should be an independent body, just like criminal court or other federal courts that can make decisions without the attorney general telling them what to do. And we have seen in immigration courts over the last year, denial rates for things like asylum getting higher and higher and higher as judges are fired and more policies are coming down from the Attorney General's office.
And statistically, the judges that are being let go are the ones that seem to advocate on behalf of migrants, right? I mean, their caseloads, they seem to grant asylum more frequently or more readily than the judges that are remaining are the ones that they want to replace them with.
Yes, absolutely.
There seems to be an agenda here that we want judges to do it our way. Those are my words.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's especially problematic because one of the problems we have in immigration court is that there's this giant backlog of cases waiting for a judge to be able to hear their cases. And one of the things that the administration said was we need more judges so that we can process cases more quickly, which is true, right? It doesn't make sense for somebody to have to wait 6 or 7 years for their case to be heard. But instead, what's happened is judges have been fired. They've hired some to replace them, but not enough.
Okay, so this is I'm trying to cheer people up before the holidays, but I'm not sure this is going to go that way. So back to the 13-year-old Guatemalan kid. Does he stand before a magistrate if he doesn't have an attorney and he's in this group of 700 and they might be sending him back to Guatemala, but he has his day in court, or we're going to give him his day in court? Does he then have to plead his own case? And does somebody interview him and ask him questions about whether or not he's been abused or whether or not he knows where his parents are? I mean, can you just sort of paint a picture of what that 13-year-old would go through?
So if the 13-year-old doesn't have an attorney, he would get sent in front of an immigration judge by himself. Sometimes folks in our network who can't represent kids are able to appear as like a friend next to them to help them through the process. But that's not in every situation. A lot of kids are just there by themselves with nobody next to them. Maybe their case manager, who's employed by the federal government, might try to give the judge some information about what they know about the child. But it's ultimately going to be the child who's going to be asked to look at the charging document that says why the government thinks that the child can be deported, plead to the charges, say whether or not they agree with them, and then say, I want to apply for asylum. I want to apply for special immigrant juvenile status. The judge is supposed to develop the record, so they may or may not ask the child a few questions to figure out if they're eligible for asylum. But then you're counting on a 13-year-old kid who's terrified by themselves in front of a judge to be able to explain to this stranger a horrible thing that happened to them in their past. And one of the things we know about working with children is that you have to build trust before the child will disclose to what has happened. So even the facts of what have happened might never come out.
So this fictitious 13-year-old that I'm describing, if he's not represented by an attorney or a family member or a friend standing beside him, probably isn't going to understand the legal jargon in the document, probably isn't going to understand what he needs to say in order to stay in the United States. And like you said, might be traumatized or scared to death to be able to speak out about things that he probably doesn't even understand that were done to him. So it just sounds like a hopeless case to me, unless that kid has representation.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think very few children could navigate this process by themselves. I don't see how a 13-year-old could ever navigate the process without an attorney. And it's one of the really unfair things about our system that frankly has always been unfair, that we don't provide attorneys to every single child who needs representation. And the amazing advocates that we work with do the best they can to take on as many cases as possible and do amazing work with them, but there's just not enough attorneys.
If you don't mind, tell me a little bit about Acacia Justice. In this case with the Guatemalan kids that were going to be sent back without due process, where do you step in? How do you step in? And what happens? I mean, what is the action plan here?
So the folks in our network, so people across the country who are representing these kids and working in the shelters where the kids are, some of them received notices that kids that they were working with might end up repatriated. And they got these notices Friday afternoon and evening of Labor Day weekend after business hours, with the clear intent from our perspective so that the government could say we legally set these notices, but so that people wouldn't actually see them and wouldn't be able to respond. And folks rushed to the shelters to meet with kids to try to figure out what was going on, to ask the child do you want to go back to Guatemala? Do you not want to go back to Guatemala? We had folks in Texas from our network who were at the airports as kids were on the tarmac waiting to see if they would be removed. And this was Friday night. The judge in the morning issued an immediate stay of a couple of hours so she could hear the case, and then issued a temporary restraining order after that. And then now a preliminary injunction is in place to prevent the government from removing Guatemala children without taking them through this process.
I'm sorry, I'm a journalist by trade and supposed to be objective and not editorialize, especially when covering these topics. But my God, I mean, the government is trying to pull a fast one to get rid of a whole bunch of vulnerable children. I'm assuming that if the kids were sent back to Guatemala, they left probably because there was problems at home, right?
Yeah.
You'd be sent back to high crime, abuse, some of the things that happened to them to begin with, broken families, whatever it is, the reasons for them to flee in the first place with family members or by themselves. And we're going to just go ahead and pretend that we don't even see them, won't give them due process, and then send them back to a dangerous place.
Yeah, that's why it feels particularly unconscionable that the government says that they're doing things like this to protect child welfare, or that they're trying to protect kids from trafficking. Because we know the reality is that they're sending kids back to dangerous situations. Kids who are fleeing abuse by their parents might now get sent back to their parents, or they might face gang violence or other harm. One of the things that the government did after this was they started offering kids $2,500 to accept to voluntary departure, basically, to say, I don't actually want to go through the court system. I just want to go back. And the government was having 14-year-olds sign something saying, like, I give up all my rights in immigration court, and you'll give me $2,500 if I go back. Which for a child who doesn't understand their rights in the process is extremely coercive. And there's a lot of kids who have borrowed a lot of money to come to the United States, whose families are in really extreme poverty. So it was just like another step of coercion for kids. The most recent thing that we've seen happen is the government announced that they would issue fines for people in the United States who entered without permission, and that those fines would apply to kids 14 and older. We've now seen those. No, that's separate. So those are fees to apply for applications. The government has also said that because you came to the U.S. without permission and are in the country without authorization, we're going to fine you a civil penalty.
Is that the $5,000?
Yes, that's the $5,000. And we've seen that now being sent to children who have been in ORR custody the entire time they've been in the United States. So these are kids in the government shelters who came to the U.S. without permission to seek help and are now being told you have to pay us $5,000.
And why do I want to scream? I mean, why do I want to
Because it's infuriating, right? Especially when you think about trafficking of kids, right? And we are concerned with where trafficking has happened for children, but we also see the administration talking about trafficking a lot and saying that they're trying to protect kids from trafficking, when we know that having a $5,000 fine as a child that you have no way of paying off yourself leaves you extremely vulnerable for exploitation or trafficking, or for your family member. These kids can't get jobs. They have no money. And they're being told, you have this fine now that you have to pay for us.
Do you have a sense, working in this crazy upside down circus of a system, what benefit to the United States is to send a bill to a 14-year-old with a $5,000 fee? I mean, are we going to make a lot of money? Is this a deterrent? Like you said, the 14-year-old doesn't have any money, So are they even going to be able to collect? Is this just punitive? I don't really get it.
I think we're trying to scare kids and their families and get kids not to fight their cases and be so scared by the paperwork and the thought that they owe this fine that they'll agree to go back and that they won't try to fight their case and stay in the United States. And it's in line with what the government is doing, right? We want to try to have as few immigrants as possible in the country.
There's no understanding that I have, given this conversation and the conversations I've had with others, that we really care about children from foreign countries.
No, I think our practice today suggests that we don't care about children from foreign countries. There's this legal framework that was set up to exist that was supposed to try to protect kids from other countries. And what we're doing now is trying to circumvent and erode that as much as possible to send kids back to places that might not be safe for them and to scare them into agreeing to go back.
What is the United States if it wasn't a country that was open to people who were fleeing persecution or hard times? I mean, we're sort of built on this idea of an immigrant spirit, but children be damned. We don't want you here. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I know that you have to do this for a living. Is any of this quantifiable? Do we know what is happening to children who are being sent back without due process or being fined? Are children going to be mixed up in criminal enterprise? I've been reporting on this for a long time. There's a massive criminal enterprise that is associated with migration. Just to get to the U.S.-Mexico border, you have to involve yourself with organized crime. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of people taking advantage of each other, and children are kind of caught in the middle of all of this. So this is not a safe place for a child in any stretch of the imagination, and the administration would have to know that. Do we know what's happening to the kids?
So I think what we know is that when somebody is removed from the United States, they become vulnerable to harm again. And whether or not that's the same harm that they already experienced, like the gang, I heard so many times the gang said if they ever saw me again, they would kill me. And then they're back and hiding and face other harm from children. And that's often why people choose to come multiple times. You also now maybe have borrowed money from the criminal enterprise to pay to come to the United States, and you owe them money. And you have to figure out how to earn that money back. So you're vulnerable to harm from them as well. We're even really concerned with the idea of like paying children to go back, not just as it's coercive, but it's also really risky to come back with money and to hear that
it makes them a target, right? They become a target. I mean, if a kid has $2,500 in cash in his pocket, I'm going to follow that kid.
Right. Yeah. It's incredibly dangerous for kids.
Is any of it illegal? Are they stepping on foundational laws that protect children? Are they violating protocols? Is there any civil liability here that the government is responsible for? Is anybody bringing suit?
Yeah. So I would argue, yes, a lot of it is illegal. A lot of it violates the Trafficking Victim Protection Reauthorization Act, which has these protections for children. And then there's this like fundamental right to due process that everybody has, and that involves legal access and a fair shot at the system. And there's a lot of litigation that is happening right now about various different pieces of it. I think I want to talk briefly about family separations also, because there's the Miss L litigation, which was the litigation that was brought when the Trump administration had their policy of affirmatively separating parents and kids at the border. And that litigation prevented future separations at the border, except for in certain situations. And we are still seeing some separations happening at the border. But we're also seeing all of these new separations happening at the interior that aren't necessarily protected by the litigation that was in place, because that had to do with what was happening at the border. But it's the same idea. It's the government intentionally tearing apart families and separating families in order to cause harm to them and harm to the immigrant community as a punitive measure, right? Or to have people think it's not worth it to be here. I risk being separated from my child. So I really see like echoes of what was happening in 2017 and 2018 happening again today, just in slightly different forms.
But now what you're saying is that it's basically the same policy in some kind of a disguise, because they're going after the parents of children in the interior and they're deporting parents and leaving the children behind, separating the families that way. It's the same process. We're tearing apart the family and we're separating kids from their parents.
And then they're telling like a mom that they've picked up, you get to decide to be deported alone or for your child to be deported also with you. So they've separated you. Your child has the right to go through this whole process to see if they're eligible to stay in the United States, but they asked you to give up all of your child's rights so that they're not separated from their parents. And it's just putting these parents in these unimaginable situations. Do I stay separate from my child and try to see if we can find a way to be safe and stay in the United States lawfully? Or do we go back to a place where we think we'll be killed, but we'll be together?
You have a 4-year-old. You have a 4-year-old who you love, who's a part of your soul and your blood. And I mean, you're awfully attached to this child, like you've never been attached to anything in your life. And then all of a sudden you're given that option, that choice to leave that child behind. And you don't really have many options here.
It's an impossible decision for parents to make. And the government is intentionally putting them in this situation instead of saying, continue through the process together. We have a system in place. We'll decide if you can stay. Maybe you'll be eligible to stay. Maybe eventually you won't be, but you'll be together during that process. You'll get due process. And if you ultimately lose, you lose your case, but at least you'll have been able to work your way through the system and have a fair shot at showing that you're eligible to be in the United States.
This administration isn't giving those options to people anymore. I mean, they're firing judges. They're removing temporary protective status. They're forcing to have people go en masse. They're arresting people in their immigration hearings. They're getting rid of the asylum system for the most part. So what process do I have to find a way to normalize or legalize my status?
We're trying to take away the process as much as possible from people. It's the reality.
Do you have a thought? How long have you been doing this?
So I've been an immigration attorney since 2009, so a long time.
So a while.
Yeah.
I mean, you've seen a lot.
It's worse than it's ever been. I think we're living in the worst case scenario right now. In Trump 1.0, it took them a while to figure out what they were doing and how to do it. And it was bad, but this is much worse. They came ready to enact as many awful policies as they could. And the reason we've been able to fight back as much as we can is because they're so blatantly illegal, right? And they're so incompetent at enacting them. But this is the worst I've seen as an immigration attorney.
But it seems to me that they may be aware that the process that they're doing is very heavy-handed, but it's a scorched earth policy. You know, they're doing as fast as they can, as much as they can, that they know they're going to get some through. They're going to be victorious in many cases. They're going to deport a lot of people, regardless of whether or not they made a mistake by sending people to a prison in El Salvador and they had to bring them back. But a chunk of them are going to have to stay. So I think that seems to be, this hurry up kind of mentality. What do you guys do as an organization to combat the onslaught? Is it just, hold your ground? Are you growing? Are you asking for more donations? Are you getting more attorneys on board? How do you do that?
Yeah, so Acacia has launched a couple of new initiatives over the last year. One of them is specifically designed at getting funding to legal service providers in impacted areas who are engaging in rapid response. So it's the National Immigration Legal Responders Alliance, and we've been able to get some foundation donations that we've then been able to distribute to folks. For example, working with people in Oklahoma who are being picked up into areas where there's not traditionally been attorneys. We're sending out some more funding to work with people in family detention to try to increase pro bono attorneys. Acacia's also launched a court watch project called Witness for Justice, where we're working with people in the community to go into court and observe what happens so we can document some of these really egregious things that are happening every day.
I'm sorry, I just don't envy you because I just see daily something changes and it gets worse. I mean, you think you've seen it all, and then he goes after Somalians, and then every day, or a new temporary protective status is done, or Venezuelans, or whatever it is. I mean, it's just this constant onslaught. I guess maybe sort of towards the end of our conversation, if you can, because I don't really know, I don't get it. I don't get the why. I don't get the billions of dollars that are being spent. They're hiring 10,000 more ICE agents. They're building more detention facilities. It feels to me like they're going to ramp up even more in the new year. Do you understand the reasoning? Is there logic behind this? Is it just xenophobia?
I don't understand the why either, besides xenophobia and trying to keep power. And I grew up in a pretty religious family. My dad is a pastor in a pretty conservative Christian church. And so even in that, it's been really hard for me to see how Christians have come behind Trump so much and started agreeing with xenophobia and anti-immigration, because even like those values that I learned as a child, and now I'm not particularly religious, were about how do we welcome people? How do we make sure people have basic dignity and respect? So it really feels like this huge culture shift for me as people moving away from these values that I thought were agreed upon values, right? Like everybody deserves to be safe. Kids deserve to have their basic needs met and to be loved and safe. People should have a fair process for any legal thing that they have to go to before they're put in extreme danger. And there seems to have been like a shift in some of these values that I don't have an explanation for. It's been really challenging to see, as I'm sure it has been for you as well, that there's this like disconnect between, do we believe in the basic dignity of all people, or do we not believe in the basic dignity of all people?
I mean, especially children. I know that Acacia Justice does a lot of advocacy for children. It's one of your specialties. It's one of your initiatives. And to have this mistreatment of children, to put them in places of danger, to not allow them to advocate for themselves or to reunite with their families, to use them as bait or pawns in an immigration system to force people to self-deport or to bring the family unit home, I mean, to me is heinous.
Yeah, me too.
It's inhuman. So that's what I'm talking about. It seems like it goes beyond xenophobia to me. Okay, so you really don't like people who speak a different language and don't look like you and have different customs. I don't really understand that thinking, but okay, that's your thing. It scares you. Okay, but that's not what this is. This is a systemic or systematic, thought out, backed by a very powerful religious doctrine, Project 2025. That's sort of the blueprint of all of this. So what's the end game here? We get rid of all of these people and then we're a better society because of it? Is that how you understand it?
I think the end game is people in power wanting to keep their power and sharing narratives that they think will help them do that. I don't know what the end game is for the average American who has bought into things. I don't think they're ever going to reach it.
Are you all at Acacia feeling the pressure, or you just have your heads down and you're doing your daily work and just doing what you can in that day? Or do you feel the crisis?
Both. I mean, I think we're definitely acutely aware that this is the worst it's ever been. The hundreds of thousands of lives, right, are at risk because of this. The legal services field also is at risk. It's a lot of people's careers and jobs and lives, and we see that through our network every day. For me, at least, the only way I get through this is by thinking through what's the next thing that we can do and what's the next thing that needs to get done. And that's how I can make it sustainable for me. So let's focus on, can we help this organization in Mississippi get funding that they need to provide to do good work and to protect some people's lives and be with some people in there? Can we do this advocacy around this issue, or implement the best structure we can to protect as many kids as possible? That's how I get through it. But I think the crisis of it is always there, and that we have 3 years of this to work our way through. And so I think we all have to figure out, how do we keep going every day and stay in this in the long haul.
Well, it's people like you in spaces of privilege that make the difference, because the people who are being attacked, or the people who are being pushed out of the country, are the most vulnerable. They don't have money for the most part. They don't have the voice. They don't have the might. They may not know the law. They may not understand what's happening to them. They came to this country because of those reasons, because they couldn't stay in their home countries, and here we are, shutting the door pretty hard and pretty cold on them as well. So I'm just going to ask anybody who watches this, if they can, to support your organization. And that can, I'm sure, happen through donations. We're going to link to Acacia Justice. Please spread this word around. Let people know what's happening to children and the most vulnerable. And Sara, I really appreciate all the work that you're doing and the effort that your organization does. It's remarkable. I don't know where we would be without it.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for this podcast and for your reporting on these stories and really getting into what's going on. It's really critical.
Thank you, Sara.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Raid, available wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about our guests and the subjects we cover, please visit our website at theraidpodcast.org.